Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest. And this is my friend Sam, who is visiting for the evening. I imagine that we'll do a lot of talk about books, and maybe even some talk about book reviewing. Sam and I are both book reviewers, and reviewing has come up on BookTube lately. I know you don't watch 20 hours of BookTube a day like I do, but it has come up on BookTube lately. I thought we might kick around some aspects of those videos. I will try to remember to link them all, because a number of booktubers have mentioned aspects of book reviewing lately I thought were interesting. Of course, you're coming at it from a different angle, and so am I. The BookTube channel Bookless Pete engaged recently with an indie author who made an offer to him that is familiar to a lot of you. The indie and self-published authors will often approach someone who has even a minor platform and say, I would like to send you a copy of my book, quote, in exchange for an honest review. Just a routine thing that they do. I've decried it for a long time as bait and switch. They're trying to get you to pay attention to the honest part when what they care about is the review part. Indie books, they die for reviews. They not just indie books, right? Mainstream publishing books. 100,000 of them go sink without a ripple. They don't get any kind of critical attention at all, and they need it. They just don't get it. So what that person typically wants is just a review, and the reason I rail against it is because your good name, your judgment is worth more than that. If you get something that's not worth reviewing, you should have the option of saying no. And Bookless Pete, he didn't name any specifics, and that was gentlemanly of him, but he got a book that is not good, and feels obliged to review it. Now, that's never going to touch on you, right? Because
he would review it on his channel?
Well, wherever the platform that you have is.
Yeah.
So on your channel, a lot of times people will ask for Goodreads. If you don't have Goodreads, if you don't have a channel, they'll want you just to post a review on NetGalley or something like that, on Amazon.
Well, I've always been interested in that because you see that exact phrasing on Goodreads and on Amazon from those people who have received a galley, but usually not from the author, usually from the publisher.
Yeah.
And they say, I received this book in exchange for an honest review, and then here's my Goodreads review or my Amazon review, because they are starred Goodreads reviewers or whatever. But you're suggesting it's different if it's the author, him or herself, offering the book.
Well, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I am partly saying that. I'm also saying that I don't like the one-to-one commerce of it.
Yeah.
That we'll send you a book if you review it. The review is the important thing. It's not the positive review. It's the review.
Yeah.
The review itself is the important thing.
Yeah.
That's what the publisher is buying by sending you a copy.
But I always got the impression on Goodreads and on Amazon that those people they had in order to get those review copies, they needed to do a lot of reviewing to be sort of like I can't remember what the term is, but they're a highly ranked Amazon reviewer or whatever it is. And if they do a lot, then they will continue to get review copies. So I think there was some sort of, you did sense that there was pressure, that it was we'll send it to you, we expect to review.
And also you wonder if there isn't pressure for it to be positive. I mean,
Yes.
if you develop a taste for getting review copies,
Right.
and you think it's predicated on not trashing things, maybe you won't trash things that deserve it.
Yeah.
Whereas with you and with me, there's, at least with me in the past and with you now, there's far more institutional cover. No one would ever dream of writing to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and saying, I'm happy to send you a book in exchange for a review.
No.
They wouldn't dream of doing that.
No.
As I've tried to tell indie authors myself when I get them directly, if you wouldn't dream of doing it for the Washington Post, don't do it for anyone. Say, here's a copy of my review. Here's a copy of my book. If you review it, I would love that. No strings attached at all. No expectations, no tit for tat. You wouldn't dream of doing that with the Washington Post. They would laugh you out of the room if you tried.
But the way they do it on those more professional levels are more, I don't know if subtle is the word, it's not particularly subtle, but they will do things like the publisher will say, we're having a lunch for our authors. Please come to so-and-so nice restaurant in, near Union Square, and have a lunch. They have a private room. You get a nice lunch. There's a lot of other media people there, and then the authors are there. The authors will take turns giving a little talk about their book. You sit at a table. You're supposed to converse with them, and sort of they're supposed to talk with you in a nice way, and in that and in other ways you start to feel a certain debt, maybe
Part of the team.
yeah.
Do you ever do that?
No.
I can't imagine you doing that.
No,
I can't.
I don't do it because then I feel bad. Then I feel obliged.
You're compromised.
Right.
Of course you are. I mean, how could you not be?
Right.
If you have canaps with somebody and they're the life of the party, and then they write a piece of crap, how are you going to call it a piece of crap? Did you order an ambulance?
I did. For later, though.
Nice and loud. I feel like yelling out the window, I've got a guest here, but then I would be adding to the noise pollution.
That's true.
If there's one thing tonight's not going to have, it's noise pollution. It's be a nice, quiet, contemplative evening.
But on the professional
But
level...
people do go to those things.
Oh, yeah, most people go. On the professional level, well, a lot of the people who go are like the editors, the assigning editors. Maybe not necessarily the critics go, but a lot of them go too. I mean, some people can go and not feel any pressure and not feel obliged, and they don't really have an issue with it. So it kind of depends. But I guess what the point I'm saying is, if there is it's not a quid pro quo precisely, but if there is an inducement, it's not we'll give you the book for free.
Right.
It has to be something else, which is like
Right.
a nice meal, a nice relationship with people. I don't know, things like that.
Is there an element of that whole circuit? I mean, you said you don't do it, but is there an element of that would make an up-and-coming reviewer feel like they've arrived?
Yeah.
Because that happens in New
sure.
York. That doesn't happen anywhere else in America.
Yeah,
that happens
yeah.
in New York.
Yes.
If they say they move there from the sticks, they're living with 6 roommates, they're spending every penny on rent, they want to be part of the scene.
Yeah.
That person would never savage a new book. Never.
Well, it's a funny... Yeah, well, I don't know.
Or would they? Would they think maybe they could make their name by doing it?
Exactly. Those are the two sort of competing things. There's one way that you get yourself known is to write a really eye-catching negative piece. A hatchet job of something, of some sacred cow, and then people will talk about it. That's the thing that gets talked about more. But yeah, on the other hand, you don't want to burn bridges. You want to be able to go to parties. But I mean, I think usually there's a way that you can thread that without too much trouble. You don't want to. The parties are usually not like the publishing houses throwing parties. They're usually magazines and things. So,
but can we agree that the best way is the way that we do it? Can we agree that the best way is that there is a kind of blood-brain barrier between you and any kind of pressure like that? Where there's no author, there's no publisher, there's no editor looking over your shoulder saying, "Hey, I'd like you to do this."
I find it very difficult when those things arise. I find it. I have a huge block or a huge sense of guilt or a huge, I don't know, sense of self-questioning when those things come about, because then there's all sorts of... I become confused about... When you write a review, there's all sorts of... You have to decide... It's not... Nothing is so black and white where it's like, this is obviously bad and this is obviously good. It's not going to happen where you will just praise a bad book. I mean, I'm not worried about something like that. But you are worried, like, there are gradations of positivity or negativity. There are different things that you can focus on. You can decide that you're just going to take a stand against something and using that book. There's different things that you can do, and if you feel compromised in any way, then you start to distrust your decision making,
right? Your own instincts.
Critical decision making, and that's what you want to.
It can be done in more or less what passes for subtle in the newspaper industry. It can be done in more or less. I've had editors come to me. They take a pitch of mine. They're not assigning a book, but once they take a pitch, I've had some editors go out of their way to say that the author of the book is, quote, a friend of the paper.
Right.
And that's about as subtle as they get. That's pretty code for,
right.
Don't savage this thing. And occasionally with editors at newspapers, I have pushed that. I've said, well, I know you said this author is a friend of the paper, but are they expecting a fair shake on their book or not?
Right.
Because this is not good.
Right.
And I would say that it's not good if I have a free hand. And, you know, to give credit where it's due, I've never had an editor stick with that friend of the paper business.
Right.
If I have something negative to say.
Right.
Unless I have something wholesale negative to say, in which case a lot of them would say, well, I don't want to waste the space on just hating a book. I'm saying there's no worth to it at all. So
there are social spheres, so I wonder about that. The booktuber friend feels compelled, but is there some other sense of compulsion beyond just this one person? Does that person feel, okay, if I don't review it, then I don't know, other people aren't going to send me books anymore?
Yeah,
it
might be, but in the sense of BookTube, especially smaller channels, I would guess that compulsion is not there at all.
Okay,
and it is a function of imagination, where you're liking getting a galley copy enough to take it on that terms. My point, I don't know if you would agree, because you know both of us have been fairly lucky in avoiding that kind of stuff. My point would be that no matter what, no conditions. Don't ever accept conditions. Don't ever take a book on condition.
Right.
If somebody says, I'm happy to send you a copy of my book in exchange for an honest review, people have said that to me through this channel, and I write back and say, congratulations on your book, but I don't take reviews on condition.
Right.
Send me the book, and that's it. And also, send me there's another thing that bothers me. You're probably shielded from it a little more. Send me the book, and that's it. Don't follow up. Okay? Don't circle back. Don't circle the wagons. Don't check with me in a week to see how far along I am or what I think of it. If I run a review of it, you'll see it because you have a Google alert set up for your name.
Right.
But don't check on me. And I know if you're brand new and you don't have any published credit to your name, maybe you have a BookTube channel that doesn't have thousands of subscribers, you might think, I can't afford to take a stance like that. But I'm saying you should, because it's going to bite you in the end that you didn't.
Yeah, you have to give something up. I mean, so again, the equivalent of the conditions would be a result of, for me, would be a result of social pressure, because I don't know, you feel like you, and I get around that by being an antisocial bridge troll.
It's kind of true.
It's
kind of true.
Don't go to parties. I mean, you just don't do it.
No, or you do it all the time. I mean, if you're John Leonard, you'll do it. You'll never pass up a party.
Right, but, or you're just there all the time and you don't, and then you don't care, I suppose. I don't know. But the easier way is just to not do it. You eliminate.
It's absolutely true. Sam is a prominent literary critic, and yet, if you were in Manhattan, you have a much better chance of actually seeing him if you're a migrating tern than if you're anyone literary at all. So that's probably the wisest approach. But who does that? I think a lot of people in this business want to have arrived.
Yeah.
They want to be the Hitchens figure with the drink in the hand and larger than life and whatnot.
No, most people don't. But I guess the point is, if you are concerned about that, you do have to sacrifice something. You are, you have to, if you want to get rid of those conditions, you do lose a little bit of something of I don't know, a sort of a social give and take, which is something that's very nice to have, and that's the difficulty of being a reviewer. I think is that you're not. It's not about politeness. It's not about give and take.
Well, speaking of politeness, that gives us a great segue to another BookTube video about reviewing, because we like to respond to each other's videos on BookTube.
Yes.
We don't get out much, so we like to respond to each other's videos. And a channel called David Novak Reads Poetry, a poet named David Novak, whose channel is called David Novak Reads Poetry, and he does, and he also writes it.
That's good.
And he responded to Bookless Pete and did a video that the highlight of it for me was that he was talking about criticism. Because, of course, the problem that Bookless Pete was facing is that I've got this galley, and I said I would give an honest review, and my honest review would eviscerate the book. And that's got him on the horns of a dilemma. At least he feels like it does.
Yeah.
And that made David Novak think about criticism. And the highlight of his video is that he read an excoriating review of one of his own books of poetry. That he printed it out, and he read the whole thing, and it was a hatchet job. It was, and that made me wonder, since I knew you were going to be coming here, it made me wonder about that aspect of the job. Again, are you insulated from that?
Yes.
So,
you have to be. You have to be insulated, or you have to not care, or you have to know, you have to have the division in your mind. I mean, yeah.
So you have never had the equivalent of meeting an author somewhere when you've savaged their work? Because if you savage somebody's book, it's gonna mean something. I mean, people are gonna notice that where they might not if you were in the Cleveland Plain Dealer.
Right. I don't think savaged. But I have met people who's or been in contact with people whose books I had been ambivalent about, or maybe more negative about, or something. But no, not like savage. Not like I wrote a hatchet job and then I had to hang out with that person. I haven't done that.
Do you know?
But the poetry world, this is really extreme because it's so.
Certainly sounded it from the thing that David read.
It's so insular and it's so much smaller. So all those questions are much harder to navigate. I think maybe not, but that's the impression I got.
Do you ever get the impression that the paper is shielding you from negative responses, or would they tell you about it? I mean, you're all big boys over there. Probably they would tell you about it, right?
I think they would tell me, but I mean, I don't. It would only be an issue if there was some question of an error. Otherwise, otherwise it's not. They don't. Otherwise, they don't care. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I guess that would be a function also of the whole antisocial bridge troll, right? I mean, if you were going to these events, these launches and parties and whatnot, and you had negative reviews under your belt, you might get drinks thrown in your face.
That's what I mean. This is why, for me, this is what has to happen for me, because it would going to the thing would become very stressful, and then I just think it would reverberate back into the writing, into the work.
And almost all the ways to avoid that stress. Almost, we'll deal with other stresses in some other way. I think probably the way I'll deal with that kind of stress, I don't want to shock you, will be to overdrink. As usual, this is the point where all the guests at that end of the camera start to reconsider their travel plans. But what I was saying was almost all the ways that I know of to avoid that stress are bad. There's a way you're taking where you simply don't mix the two worlds. But if you do mix the worlds, all the ways are bad. You're either going to feel that stress because you're going to make enemies and have drinks thrown in your face, or you're going to avoid it by not making enemies. And that means you're going to change your reviews. I was at the Hamptons. I went to a literary event on Fifth Avenue, and I got invited to the Hamptons. A book critic. So I went, and we played touch football, and there was some parasailing, and 2 years later, my host has a book. Well, how on earth are you going to...
And I hate to say it, but for me, you need to not, even though that is real, with the person you're talking about reading this hatchet job of a book of poetry that he wrote and poured his heart into, but you need to not think about it that way. And I really think that the great thing about art and about our responses to it is that we can be absolutely as judgmental as we want to be. Whereas I think in human relationships, you can't. I think that you really can't. You probably disagree, but you cannot judge people in the same way. You have to.
You were looking ahead in this comment, weren't you, and realizing who you're sitting next to.
When you meet people, you can judge people like that.
Happy to judge them. I actually said before this video, I hope they take it easy. It's been 10 interruptions now. Anyway,
you have to think about social niceties, and you have to think about comedy, and you have to think about getting along, and you have to know the limits of yourself, and you have to think about the golden rule of how you treat people, and you have to think about you don't judge because you don't want to be judged yourself.
Actually, we were talking about that before that we started filming, right? That if you don't think about those things, you could end up regretting it. And it wouldn't mean that you're being dishonest.
Right.
It would mean that maybe you laid it on a little too thick and weren't paying attention to how the other person would feel.
Right.
And the author would feel. Some authors are people. right?
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's safe to say that some of them are.
Yes, but ultimately, still, you're treating what you've got as discrete from the person to some extent. I mean, yes, that can go too far, but to some extent, you're giving them the respect of treating what they've done as a work of art that is going to exist separate to them, and that is a thing that then you need to, because you've done that, and that is an inherently respectful thing to do towards them as an artist. Then you need to be able to judge it honestly, in which you are not. You don't want to go overboard in which you're just sort of showboating in your response. That's just bad criticism. But you do need to. But then you can hate something if you have honest reasons for hating it. You can like something. You can judge something and just say this is bad if you have honest reasons to do so. Whereas in social relations, I don't think you can do that. And that is, to me, that's the beauty of art, and that's really the freedom and the importance of criticism, is that you are not compromised. You don't have to soften or blunt or sort of, you can, whatever your response is. If your response is some sort of complicated ambivalence, then that's great. That's fine also. But you are free from all the social conventions that go into how we interact with other people when you are dealing with a work of art.
Now I'm going to feel a little self-conscious attacking all of your life choices later tonight. It's going to feel a little odd now. Because
you can judge people. I speak only for myself.
It's going to feel a little awkward. I wish, though, you made a great point there. I wish so much that authors, especially indie authors, especially first or second time indie authors who are new to this, I wish like crazy they would understand that a tough evaluative review, even a harsh review, is an act of respect.
Right.
I wish they would understand that. Do they think they're going to be hovering in the background of the email list 200 years from now?
Sometimes they do. And sometimes they do. On the rare occasions that I have met some people and I remembered, my review was not this glowing thing. I did get the sense that like they felt happy that they had been read seriously.
Yeah. Well, in your case, I don't know if you get it from authors, but I get it from authors and have for over a decade. That authors that say that, unhesitating to say that your criticism made them better. So I don't know if they tell you that, but I hear it plenty, and that's an act of respect. That means you took the work seriously.
Right.
Right.
And if you know them, and if you're thinking about how it's going to make them feel, I mean, you do that to some degree. But if that is a serious concern in your mind, then you are not doing real criticism ultimately.
And the dichotomy between how you treat a work of art and how you treat a person is a segue to the last bit of criticism on BookTube that I watched recently. A channel called CriminOlly, Ollie at CriminOlly, was talking about how he reviews books. He did just a quick video today about how he reviews books. Thought it was absolutely fascinating. He of course is not institutional. He doesn't review these things for an editor. He puts them on his channel. That's one of the things that's different about BookTube, is that there's no.
So his channel is him. I read this book and I'm reviewing. I'm evaluating. I'm reviewing it.
And I always
great.
flinch just a bit when BookTubers call that reviewing.
Yeah,
because it's. I don't know. Maybe the flinching is just bad. There's no. It's very immediate. There's no institutional layer at all. To me, it seems more like reacting, than reviewing, even detailed reacting, which is very interesting. That can be very interesting. But in his video, one of the things that Ollie said is, I'll leave all these things linked down below. I'll try to remember to do that. The wine is not flowing yet, so I will remember to do that. But one of the many things that Ollie said was that, one of the fascinating things he said was that he really goes light on plot summary, because you can go anywhere for a plot summary. So why do I need to bother? I think he mostly reviews fiction, and I go heavy on plot summary when I'm reviewing a work of fiction. I view that as, I mean, I subtly work in criticism into the plot summary, but I lay it on more than he does. I hadn't even thought of that, but then I remembered reviews of his that I've watched, and that is true. But he also talked about, he didn't use the dreaded S word. He didn't use the word subjectivity, but he was talking about how, I don't want to say in my review, this thing is bad. I instead want to say, I did not like this thing.
Right. And
it made me, it's true, his channel is so welcoming. It's so egalitarian. He wants to make sure he's not judging you. As befits the guy who created the BookTube event that we are all celebrating right now, Garb August, all about reading trash. We're reading trash all month long, and that works perfectly for that attitude. But it made me think, that's not what you or I do, all right? That's not what a lot of book reviewers do. They take it as a given that there is an objective way to say this is bad. Not just I think this is bad, but
Right.
this is poorly done.
Right.
You do that. You don't know how it's pronounced in it, as, for instance, Christian Lorenzen would be, or me. You know,
Yes.
typically as pronounced with it. But there's still very much implied in your reviews that if something's done poorly, that means it could be done better. It's not just that it didn't sit well with you.
Right. Yes.
Do you have, when you talk about this subject with other people, do you have a problem explaining that that there is a kind of, I don't even know the word I want, like a skeleton that is non-negotiable? So there's coloring, and there's skin, there's flesh, there's flab.
Yeah.
But the skeleton is non-negotiable. If an author flubs a plot, that's not,
Right.
I liked it and you won't. That's just wrong. It's just poorly done.
Right. Right. Yes.
So what do you
Yes.
do with people who want to retreat to it's all subjective, man? What do you do with people like that? I've tried to say on this channel, that's fundamentally antithetical to our profession.
Yes, I understand what you mean. I mean, I think of it as it is all subjective, but subjectivity can become so, it can be informed in a degree that, to an extent that it is less obviously subjective, if you know what I mean. Everything is still coming from a voice.
It's all coming from a person.
It's
right.
coming from a person, it's coming from a voice, and it's coming from a point of view.
But the person, in your case, has read 30,000 books.
Right, so the more informed that is, and also, if you are informed, but you're not, and also you don't have any obvious investment either way, if that makes
right.
if that makes any sense. It's just another thing that you have read and you have opened yourself up to, and you're trying. The more sort of informed and also not detached, because you still want to be emotionally involved because the book has involved you emotionally, but detached in the sense of, like, my life was not riding on this being good or bad. It doesn't.
Right.
It makes no difference to me.
And I've seen a million examples of it.
Either
Done
way.
well, done poorly.
Once you do that, then you do reach a degree of objectivity. But you're still only focusing on a limited number of things. So hopefully you are focusing on the things that are most important, the things that the author has, that are most crucial to the book that has been written. But conceivably, someone else could focus on other things and could find things that were good by taking a different angle at the book. So that's how you rationalize the idea that two people could come to different judgments, even though, and conceivably both those people would be right in a way, and both of them would be objective, because there are different angles, there are different ways to look at books,
right.
There are different things to emphasize.
So it sounds like you're saying the crucial thing there is that neutral objectivity.
You do, exactly.
You can't go into it like
Yes.
An old friend of mine used to say, when you're wondering whether or not a building is good looking, you definitely want the appraisal of an architect, and you definitely don't want the appraisal of a rival architect.
Right.
Because if you've got too much of a dog in the race, all the knowledge in the world is gonna hurt you, not help you.
The interesting thing about criticism, the thing that makes it really alive, I think, is it requires a huge amount of flexibility, because you need to pull away. You need to be able to be detached. But a work of art is compelling you emotionally. So you also need to be able to give yourself to whatever it's doing and see if it works. So you need to get close and then move away. And it's a constant, and you also need to get close in the writing of it if you're trying to express whatever emotional response it had it activated in you, or whatever intellectual response. You need to be able to give yourself to that, but then you need to be able to distance yourself and sort of take a larger...
But what about the element of expertise? I mean, after a while, you say you could read a book and you could dislike aspects of it, and then someone else could come at it from an equally professionally neutral standpoint and
Yes.
find things to like.
Yes.
But when it comes to a new piece of literary fiction,
Yeah.
what are the odds that you would dislike a book that is actually good?
Yeah.
At this point, aren't those odds vanishingly small?
There,
I mean,
I
no matter
think
how
so.
many viewpoints you get through, nobody's going to pass an elephant by you.
Right.
Are they?
I think so. I mean, I think so. I think if something is really, really worthwhile, I'm not going to miss that aspect of the book, and because I'm so homed in on other things that are less relevant. And
It's the access to grind that would make you miss it, aren't they?
Right.
That's
Yes.
the only way you could miss an
Yes.
elephant is if you had an axe to grind against it.
Exactly. And we talk about angles, and what you're supposed to do is let the book define the angle for you. Whatever the book is giving you, whatever your patterns you realize, whatever the heart of the book is, that's what you want to make the angle. But if you brought something else to the book and you say, I'm just going to read it in this lens, and you do that unwittingly all the time for whatever reason. It might be because you read another book that was vaguely similar just before it, and so now you're thinking about the book in relation to that book.
I just had that happen to me. The review that I just wrote. And when I finished with it, I looked at it and realized this is just you hating hippies. So you can't run this. This is not a legitimate review of anything. So you just have to do it over again.
But nevertheless, it still is an endlessly interesting and often confounding thing where you just read something and you're just like, this book does not work, it's not good. And then you look at the reviews, you look at the pre-publication reviews, and they're all starred, and they're saying things like, this is a fast-moving... I just read a book, I'm not going to say what it is, but to me, it was incredibly boring. It had no pace at all. It was just constant exposition dumps. It wasn't moving at all. It had no charisma, no personality in the narrator's voice. And then I looked at, and I just was thinking, this book just doesn't work. It's a flop by a talented writer. And you look at the pre-publications, and they're all starred reviews across the boards, and they say things like captivating, moves fast, readers will be turned on by this thrilling tale, things like that. And you just think, something has happened here, and that's when you start to get like, oh, these people didn't read it well, and they just wanted to give it. You start to become cynical in your thinking about other people, which is not, that all exists, but it's not a good way to think about things. But so ultimately, you just have to trust yourself.
You've outgrown the other response to that would be to say, maybe I'm wrong, just fundamentally wrong.
No,
and
you
don't have that.
You have to trust yourself, because otherwise, how can you review it? I mean, you can introduce the confusion. You can introduce, other people seem to think otherwise, and yet I'm baffled by that. You could introduce that as an aspect of the review, but you can't just change your mind,
right?
Because
ultimately you'll either have a case or you won't.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yes, exactly. You're using the book, but that stuff happens all the time, and there's no real answer to it. I mean, it's you have to. So yes, so ultimately you do have to trust your expertise, and yet you do know that it's not. You're not a machine, so you have to be open to the possibility that you have missed something, and then you have to consider that possibility and turn it over and try to see what other people are seeing. And if you can see it, then you go back to it. But usually you can't, and you just think, well, I just disagree, and that's all there is to
I
it.
love that aspect about BookTube, but only up to a point. Only up to a point.
Yeah.
If I say that a book is not enjoyable, I love hearing from experienced readers, passionate readers, who say, no, I did enjoy it. But if I think a book is bad, that's not negotiable. If a book is bad, well, then if you say it's not bad, then it's just a case of lay out your index cards and I'll lay out mine. But enjoyable, I guess, is, I suppose that's what Ollie was getting at.
Yeah.
You shouldn't say, this is so terrible that no one will ever enjoy it.
Right. And the thing is, I think if someone's doing BookTube reviews, they don't need to. You don't need to have a sort of a professionalism. You don't need to have that sort of objectivity. You can just say, these are my reactions to this book, and it can be really intelligent and really interesting. Whereas if you're in a more professional berth, you do want to have a kind of that more distant, sort of faceless, where you're not just saying I liked it or I didn't like it, I enjoyed it or I didn't enjoy it. You are making a more criticism-based case.
I see what you're saying, but you're not meaning that to. Someone could construe that as being condescending.
No, it's
but
just
you don't mean it that way.
It's just
right?
a different sort of thing.
I have said that for 8 years.
And a lot of people...
that I don't want it to sound condescending. For 8 years I've said, I do not come to BookTube for book reviews, and I've never seen one on BookTube. And some people have found that condescending when I'm not... The things I find on BookTube are wonderful, but they... I don't know, that remove often isn't there. It's...
Right.
Which is fine.
And it's not always there in more professional venues either. Increasingly so, I think. I think there's more of a trend where people will bring their personal experience themselves into the review.
Oh yeah,
and that's a way in which you are announcing subjectivity.
Right. Don't venues more and more request that?
Yes. Yes, it's more of like sort of my memoir experience with this book, which is a way to do things. It's just a way.
It's a way to do things.
I would never do it. Some people have the personality for it, and their writing inclines that way. So it makes sense. But I do think it is a different kind of criticism.
Well, there you go. 3 BookTube videos, more or less about book reviewing. Ordinarily, this would have made 3 30-minute response videos from me, but I figured I've got another critic in the room. We might as well talk about them all in one big melange.
You know, I've been putting my hand like this, and it's creating kind of an emoji, a thumbs up emoji on the screen.
Is this subtle? Oh my God! And look at that! It's mirroring. Is that showing on the video?
I wonder.
It's noticing a thumbs up?
Yeah.
Oh my God!
It's creating
how horrifying
an image.
We're neither one of us thumbs up and thumbs down critics.
No,
we're about nuance.
exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, your thoughts in the comments? Book reviewing, book reacting. What do you find book reviews on BookTube? Do you think they're different from the written ones you read? Love to hear all about it. I will link the videos before the wine flows.
And give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the comments.
2 critics talking about book reviewing for a Sunday. So now I'm gonna try to remember what you said about how you don't just nakedly judge things in face-to-face conversation. I'm going to try to remember that. Maybe that's what I've been doing wrong all these years. That could be. It never occurred to me. Anyway, we'll be back. The baby says goodbye. She's here too. We'll see you soon, BookTube.